Good morning, Matrix. How are you this fine morning? What I wish to do today is have a look at the prelim paper and look at the questions, the kind of questions that you will get in your prelim paper and in your final. Now, the poem that I want to do with you today is The Child Dying. I am looking at the prelim paper, English Home Language, 2019. And guys, what is so phenomenal about the poetry is that the questions are the same for every poem. Isn't that amazing? So before you go in to write a paper, you can preempt what the kind of question will be. Now, I've gone through this paper and papers before, and these are the kind of questions that you get poem after poem, year after year. My suggestion to you is that you avoid the poetry essay. That little mini essay, avoid it. Do the poetry contextual. So you get 4 scene poems. The first question is an essay question. Avoid that. That means out of the 3 scene poems, you have to choose 2. So don't take a chance and learn 4 or 5 and leave the rest. Do all the poems that are prescribed. So, going through all the questions, these are the kind of questions that pop up again and again. So, the first kind of question is, refer to line so-and-so and discuss. Refer to line so-and-so and explain. Refer to poetic techniques. Now, you know what poetic techniques are. They are, you've got to comment on the structure of the poem. What do I mean by structure? Structure is it a sonnet? Is it an elegy? Is it a ballad? How many quatrains? How many stanzas? You have to explain the structure and how it contributes to the message of the poem. Then another poetic technique is the pace of the poem. How quickly or how slowly does the poem move? That is dictated by punctuation, by the diction in the poem. What do I mean by diction? I mean the words that are used. Then you will look at rhythm, at rhyme, at figures of speech. Which figures of speech are used? What are the images in the poem? So that's what is meant by poetic technique. So we've looked at refer to line da-da-da, refer to poetic techniques. That's the first kind of question. Then you get the question that says describe the situation, say in the opening stanza. Describe it. So that's what you've got to do. You have to describe it, place it in context. What is happening in the opening stanza, for example? Then you have again and again a question that says account for. Account for the repetition in the poem. So in other words, explain why the repetition is used. So you've got to identify that repetition. That means you have to quote using inverted commas. And you've got to say why the poet used the repetition, what was the effect that he hoped to achieve. Now that's one of the questions in The Child Dying that we are going to answer. Account for the poet's attitude. So before you do anything, you've got to say what the poet's attitude is and account for it, explain why he feels that way. Another kind of question that you get again and again is comment on. Comment on the use of figures of speech. So you highlight those figures of speech. You say what the meaning of it is, so that if they say comment on the metaphor, you have to say what is being compared and comment on how it contributes to the meaning, to the message of the poem. Then you have comment on the speaker's reasons for, comment on the effectiveness of, comment on a figure of speech. So that comes again and again and again. And then usually the last question of the poem is comment critically. Comment critically and discuss the validity of. That means you can't just make a statement. You have to persuade by using words from the poem why you feel the way you do. Comment critically means analyze. Analyze. Remember, guys, your answer means nothing unless you can substantiate by referring to the poem. So you don't just make a statement and then quote. You make a statement, you quote, and then you link your quote to your statement. So it's a 3-step answer, that comment critically. And that goes for your literature as well. It's a 3-step statement. Make a statement, quote from the passage, make the link. Only then do you get a mark. All right, so I'm going to look at the prelim paper 2019, question 2, the child dying. Let's have a look at 2.1. For 2 marks, the question is, describe the situation that exists at the beginning of the poem. Describe. Okay. So you have to say what is going on in the first stanza. So you would say something like, a child is describing his feelings and his experience of dying. That's your opening sentence. 1 mark. Fabulous. Hallelujah. But that's not enough for 2. So you have to say that he says farewell to the universe that he has experienced. He has to say farewell to his father. And his father said that it's quite miraculous that he is able to leave this universe. In addition, the first stanza talks about him taking memories with him. So when he goes into the unknown, he will have memories which can accompany him. Then he talks to his father about the eternity that he sees before him. Now you've got enough for 2 marks. You have described what is going on in the first stanza. Let's look at 2.2, 2 marks. Account for the repetition of father. Account. Explain what is being repeated and why the poet has used repetition. Now remember, that's part of your poetic techniques. So the child repeats again and again, father, father, father. You can imagine this child, we don't know if it's a boy or a girl, a young child is afraid. So he holds on to the one sure thing, which is his father. The child is afraid. The child is anxious. The child is insecure. On the one hand, the child accepts that death is near, but the child is afraid of the unknown. He has to navigate this territory, unknown territory, this dark place, this cold place, alone. So he holds on and he repeats, Father, Father, hold my hand. I am dying. There would be your 2-mark answer. Let's have a look at 2.3. Now, guys, this is a fabulous question because it says, by referring to poetic techniques, wonderful, you know what poetic techniques are, discuss how the poet succeeds in portraying the child's feelings effectively. So, 3 marks. Immediately you have to say what the child's feelings are. Before you do anything, before you even go into the poetic techniques, you talk about the child's feelings. So we know that the child is feeling afraid, unsure. He is filled with trepidation to move into this unknown space that he calls cold. He doesn't know where he's bound. So how does he feel? He feels afraid. He feels desperate. How do we know that? Now you go to the poetic techniques. So you would say the child feels afraid and isolated. How do we know this? Because the poet uses various poetic techniques. All right. So he uses repetition. He talks about father, father. He talks about go out. He repeats cold. So that repetition reveals his anxiousness and his feelings of separation and isolation. Also, another poetic technique that the poet uses are sound devices. What are our sound devices? They are alliteration. What is alliteration? The repetition of the consonant sounds. The poet uses assonance. What is assonance? Assonance is the repetition of the vowel sounds. They are all sound devices. So you would say the poet uses alliteration. That's not enough. You have to quote the alliteration. So you would say the repetition in line 14 is light on the land. You would say the repetition in line 16 is sun on the sea. What is the effect of that repetition? That sound device adds a little lightness to the feeling of the stanza. All right? It adds a little lightness in the way the child feels. He has become comfortable with the world that he's living in. And that lightness on the land, the sun on the sea, those memories he will take with him. So that adds to a little feeling of comfort for the child. However, there are also negative connotations. Not a place, but the world is out. So those negative connotations in that diction also provides the feeling of isolation, establishes a feeling of separateness. That is how the child feels. So for 3 marks, guys, that would be perfect. Now let's look at 2.4. Comment. Aha, we know about comment. Comment on how the use of oxymoron and antithesis contributes to our understanding of the child's situation. So, for 3 marks, that is a 3-part question. You've got to know what oxymoron and antithesis means. You've got to talk about our understanding, and you've got to talk about the child's situation. So that's a 3-part question for 3 marks. So before we do anything, let's just highlight what an oxymoron is, what antithesis is. In fact, I'm going to talk about all those contradictory figures of speech. So please note this. Oxymoron is when 2 words are usually placed side by side. All right? So in this poem, we've got, in the first stanza, unfriendly, friendly. We talked about that in our analysis of this poem in previous little recordings. Okay? So oxymoron, 2 words that are usually placed side by side. So in this poem, unfriendly, friendly universe. In other dramas, I think in Romeo and Juliet, they talk about bitter, sweet. That's oxymoron. Then, antithesis. What is antithesis? Opposing ideas are balanced one against the other. So we know that in stanza 2 of this poem, we've got the antithesis of this vast universe and the small stature of the child. So that antithesis is portrayed in this stanza 2 of this poem. All right, so now you know what antithesis is. Oxymoron, 2 words that are placed side by side. Antithesis, opposing ideas balanced one against the other. Let's move on, although this is not asked for. What is juxtaposition? Juxtaposition occurs when 2 different images are placed side by side. What is a paradox? A paradox is a statement which at first appears to be contradictory, like he's telling the truth when he says he is a liar. When you first hear that, you think, what does this mean? This is contradictory. But when you think about it, it makes absolute sense. So guys, learn those contrasting figures of speech. Oxymoron, antithesis, juxtaposition, and paradox. In this question, they are talking about oxymoron and antithesis. So let's go. We, as the reader, understand that in the opening stanza, oxymoron has been used, unfriendly, friendly universe. So we have to explain that. Why does the child speak about the universe as being friendly? Perhaps friendly because he has wonderful memories of it. Perhaps unfriendly because he has become ill and has to leave it. So those are the ideas that you as the reader would understand. And of course we have to explain the child's situation. He is dying. So he is confused. He has these conflicting ideas. One moment grateful for the years that he has spent in this universe, but also this universe has proved to be unfriendly because it has placed this burden of illness on him. Then we have a look at antithesis. We look at the second stanza. You are so great and I am so small. I am nothing. You are all. So he speaks there and he draws the contrast between the vastness of the universe and his own small stature. So you can understand how afraid he may feel. He feels insignificant. He feels there's almost kind of a nothingness there when the universe is so vast and he is so small. So what does that do for the reader? It emphasizes the tragedy of a child so young having to deal with such a huge burden when he is so small. He appears to be almost like a victim. How does he respond to this? So, guys, for 3 marks, you would discuss the oxymoron, the antithesis, how you, the reader, sees it, and of course, you have to then explain what the child's situation is, a child who is dying. And that would be 3 marks. And that, guys, is the 10 marks for the first question that you would do. Question 2.1. You would possibly, and I would suggest it, ignore question 1 for it is an essay, a little mini essay, poetry essay. My suggestion is avoid it. I've always felt that when marking these matric papers, students do far better when they have contextual questions. That is, when you have the poem and questions are placed, on that poem. That is all for the moment. Go well. Au revoir. Till the next time.